If the broader attitude had been, I don't like Vaush's sexism here, but Lamau, look at how mad J.K. Rowling is, I would have been fine with that. I would have honestly found it kind of heartwarming, you know? Like, okay, I'll take the hit, fine, I'm sorry about the ironic sexism, but yeah, look at us, we're making fun of J.K. Rowling. It would have been a pretty cool rallying moment. I think it would have done a lot for broader unity, and I think it would have been more politically expedient than in a time where news articles are being written about this tweet exchange, attacking the not J.K. Rowling person. That's the issue that I have. If the rest of the online left had acted in a sensible way, as far as I'm concerned, acted in a anti-transphobia way, then this wouldn't really be an issue. Jesse Gender. I'd go over it, but it's like 40 minutes. And I don't really know what the point is because I already know that I'm right. Everyone else already knows that I'm right, except for these people. It's a good video. No, it's not. If it was, the title would say, I agree with Vaush on everything. The main issue that I have is that Jesse Gender is racist and probably says the N-word with the hard R directly to black people. That's the main issue that I have with Jesse Gender. At least, I can infer that from this video title. It's pretty easy for me to, actually. Can you please not? Why? What? You don't want to call out racism? I see people in chat aren't as quick as me. They haven't made the same inferences as me. All right. Well, let us imagine a situation in which a black SoundCloud artist makes a song which makes fun of Ben Shapiro, but has some misogynistic lyrics in it. And Ben Shapiro clips out a section of that song with the misogynistic lyrics and is like, see, look at this misogyny. This is why black culture can never rise above poverty and crime. Now imagine if in a situation like that, people in the online left were like, you know, this is really two people. This is really both these people are bad. They're both bad. Two fighting. This is not the time for misogyny. All right? Now you've given Ben Shapiro a weapon. Yeah. The point isn't the ironic misogyny. The point is that hyperfixating on it to the detriment of the unity against the broader evil is really, really destructive. Do you understand? Please tell me you understand. Like, this is literally... Okay, guys, I'll ask you. Do you agree that being shitty to short guys is, like, bad? Like, a lot of people do it. I do it as well. But it's, like, it's bad, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with being short. Short men are kings. Yeah, it's not good. So, like... Imagine if a person, like one of the Chapo guys, called Ben short, and Ben quote tweeted them and was like, look at the intolerant left or whatever. And people on the left are like, ooh, well, why would you give him ammunition? Like, fuck you. You would never do that. The only reason this is happening is because I'm the one who was ironically misogynist. That's the only reason why. If it was any other person on the left, cis or trans, then the rest of the left would say, oh, well, I don't like the misogyny, but like, oh my God, J.K. Rowling is triggered. Let's make fun of her. Any other person but me. Any other person but me. It is only me. And I don't know about that, Vaush. I think it'd be any sufficiently large lefty. I don't believe that. Contra has done this, and Contra is literally the biggest figure in the online left. Contra has literally ironically invoked bigoted language in components of arguments against TERFs. Is it okay to be transphobic towards transphobes? The answer is yes, but I'd love your take. Isn't the main thing that I say about Blair White is that Blair White thinks she's a man and she's like taking it out on every other trans woman? Like, she's so obviously self-hating. And like that's clearly the root of all of her politics. Like nothing, like there's nothing beyond that. It's clearly just like projected self-hate. I don't know if she's like the bigger Gammy or if Gammy's the smaller Blair, but can we please watch the video? Watch the video, she agrees with you? Sure, whatever, I don't care.
Is it okay to be sexist to J.K. Rowling for being a transphobe?
See, the point is, the problem is, this already is a misdirection. This is already No, guys, you're missing the point too. The point is that it's irrelevant. The point is that by focusing on this to the detriment of the broader context of the disagreement, you're giving them ammunition. That's this wasn't the point. The reason I made the video title of my video, The Moral Necessity of Sexism Against J.K. Rowling, and why I do it again, is because I'm edgy. But in that video, the arguments I make are about the optics of the situation, not the validity of being sexist. The only comment that I make on the sexism itself is that it wasn't funny and that it wasn't that big of a deal.
Or to put it in a more broad way, is it okay to be sexist to someone who is spouting transphobic rhetoric? Or, to put it less broadly, can you Angel 1 a Borg Queen? Sorry, Star Trek in joke, it's a thing on this channel, you'll pick up on it if you're new here.
Vaush, there's no moral reasoning to do it, but you did it and it's fine. Drop it, sexism sucks, you're too on this hill. No! You still think the point is the sexism! The point is that the entire online left fell and implicitly defended J.K. Rowling because the alternative would have been ignoring light edginess from me. Don't you think that's a problem? I'm the edgiest guy on the online left, or at least I'm treated like the edgiest guy on the online left, and my community is optics frogging me over something that you would hear at a 6th grade lunch table. The hill I'm dying on here has nothing to do with the misogyny. I don't care. The point is the ability to fall behind the... Listen, okay? You know what? All right. The next time Ben Shapiro calls black people subhuman because some black guy called him a short bitch, I'm gonna hand ring over it. I'll do what you want me to. Fine. Oh, I can't believe you'd give Ben Shapiro ammunition. The next time a trans woman with 13 followers on Twitter gets quote tweeted by J.K. Rowling and kills herself, I'll say, oh, well, you know, I don't agree with her being bullied into killing herself, but, you know, she sure did give trans people a bad name by being angry at a billionaire. No, okay. Jesse Gender retweeted Cat Black defending J.K. Rowling. How are people saying this video agrees with me? Vaush, you're getting psychotic. Move on. If you think this is psychosis, then you... This is the thing that bothers me. The fashion in which I'm defending my point here is literally identical to the way in which I defend everything I believe in. You think it's psychotic because you don't agree with me. And you don't agree with me because you're retarded and you were dropped on your head several times as a child, probably from the, you know, rigorous lovemaking of your mom with someone who wasn't her husband, all right? Please leave forever. They must have bumped into the cradle several times over. I doubt they even picked you up until they were finished. Dude, you watched like 20 seconds, you don't know what the argument is yet? I love it. I love it so much when people in my chat engage in stupid levels of charitability with people just because they happen to be fans of the channel. Are you fucking joking? Look at the comment section.
People did this with non-compete.
Yeah, they did this shit with non-compete too. Look at the tweets. Like, oh yeah, dude, this video totally agrees with me. They're just retweeting things that, like, say the opposite of agreeing with you. Shut up. Oh my god, you people are horrible. Jesse Gender has a point. Jesse Gender hates black people. There we go.
Here. But jokes aside, this question of can you be sexist to transphobes is an issue that got raised recently after J.K. Rowling screenshotted and commented on YouTube streamer Vaush's following tweet. All J.K. Rowling had to do was shut the fuck up and she could have been almost uncritically beloved for like a century. Women be quieter and start apologizing challenge. In response to the tweet, Rowling herself stated, "What you and your ilk fail to appreciate is how tremendously familiar I find your tactics. I had a violent ex-husband who used to tell me life would be great if only I'd comply, but you're making the same mistake he did."
Hold on, chat, this is what I mean. From the same person as before, at Vaush, no, women are just bored with misogyny and want you to stop defending it under a moral right to be misogynist. You have a pink tag in chat, so I know you're a woman, or at least you're she, her. Thank you for giving ammunition to me, a misogynist, with your sheer... I just explicitly said I didn't defend the misogyny. The point wasn't the misogyny. But thank you for proving my point, okay? Now I do think women are subhuman because you have demonstrated to me the cognitive incapability of grasping points which I have laid out to you in fucking elementary school language. Leave. Jesus Christ. I don't know why I take my earbuds out when I talk to chat. I should stop doing that.
Women like me can't be bullied out of resistance. Basically, Rowling does what she typically does in these situations and used Vaush's tweet as evidence that trans people and our allies are misogynistic, reinforcing to herself and her audience that she is capital R right in attacking trans people. She does this pretty much all the time. There's numerous examples on her Twitter thread which should be on the screen right now. So this is particularly nothing new. But what makes this interesting, especially as someone who's also in the YouTube sphere, is that Vaush, who is a left-leaning streamer, for his part, defended his tweet in a few interesting ways, sparking a conversation about how we push back against transphobia and transphobic movements that J.K. Rowling is currently a part of and one of the most prominent voices in. And I think it's an interesting discussion worth breaking down. Now, this conversation could be as simple as saying, well, sexism is bad and you shouldn't do it regardless of the circumstance. And I 100% agree with that statement. But I do think to limit the discussion to just sort of that statement would not engage with people who disagree with that stance. So I want to look at and engage with the question overall and how people are talking about it and justifying it, because I think
okay, guys, it's a long video. Just chat. I need you guys to tell me at any point in this video, does this person recognize that my point wasn't that it's good to be misogynistic against transphobes, but rather that focusing on, like, edgy behavior. Yes? Okay.
There are interesting
and I'll watch the whole thing. We'll get to every point in the title. I'm tired. I got my coffee. We're going full sippy mode. We're doing it all, okay? All right.
Made and nuance to be had. Because I will say, when I watched Vaush's defense of the tweet, I actually agreed with Vaush on how he understands how transphobic systems are utilized and weaponized in order to justify and signal to an audience that transphobia is acceptable, and something that J.K. Rowling is doing quite often. However, I think he misses the mark in understanding the difference between how these optic-based politics are thought of and utilized by those pushing them, and those who these tactics are speaking to, and what the difference is between those two things. And so as a result, I want to have a conversation about this issue, not necessarily me dictating to you what my beliefs are, but just sort of tell you what my thoughts on this are in order to create that broader discussion. However, before we get into that, two things. First, this video is going to take as a given that J.K. Rowling is transphobic and has done...
She disagrees with you, but she doesn't take you out of context. Is that the bar, man? Not taking me out of... Like, it's like you mean the pedo shit? Like, okay, well, they disagree, but, like, they didn't call you a pedo. So, you know, okay, I appreciate that.
Harm to the trans community. If that is something that you disagree with, let me recommend these two videos of mine that go into why I disagree with that.
It is
and
a
the links
bar.
to those videos are below. However, to give current context to this past week in which Vaush's tweet was made was a particular highlight when it comes to J.K. Rowling expressing transphobia and transphobic narratives. Half of her Twitter feed these past few days was directed at trans people, mostly stemming, it seems, from the discussion around the...
I agree with you, and I think you're... Oh, thank you for the, what's that, the fourth Punnett square over there? You know, the...
case of Maya Forstarter, the woman who was not rehired after she spread transphobia in her work Slack and attacked trans people online, for whom Rowling spoke up about at the start of her transphobia controversy several years ago. Additionally, on top of that, though, Rowling also spread misinformation about proposed reforms to gender in which Vaush made his tweets was particularly being mired in transphobia on Twitter. Now, I'm going to do a long video down the line that focuses on how that type of gender-critical / turf radicalization occurs that J.K. Rowling is displaying, but I wanted to at least give context for which this conversation is happening right now. So not only has J.K. Rowling been expressly harmful to trans people, she has continued to creep further into more and more direct harm, using her platform to give attention to hate movements, political misinformation, and promote harmful people. So that's the context that we're currently talking about J.K. Rowling in, but there is another context that I wish to just sort of give voice to before we get started on the actual discussion. Because there is this current discourse and view within left-leaning YouTube spaces of supposedly video essayists like myself as somehow being against what we would term debate bro live streamers, represented by folks like Vaush.
This video is going to be about a lot of stuff. Now, I'm not going to hide the fact that I do have criticisms
of the debate bro sphere, most of which are in alignment with YouTuber FD Signifier's views that he expressed in his video Breaking Bad. Sorry, Breaking Bread, not Breaking Bad. FD Signifier did not make Breaking Bad. Totally very different things. I meant his video Breaking Bread.
I might like him.
However, that being said, though, to say that I ubiquitously hate every part of debate bro content or hate specific debate bros would be an inaccurate framing. I have respect for many of those creators, and even more specifically, this video is not here to attack or address debate bros within this video. Not to mention that I also have issues with video essayist culture as well. Also, that isn't what this video is about. I have opinions on Vaush specifically too, both positives and negatives, but I'm also not going to be talking about that in this video. And firstly, it's because I find that framing of video essayists versus debate bros to be unhelpful and unnuanced and just creates infighting, not conversations. I think that there's a much larger conversation to be had about that sort of...
I'll acknowledge that I'm a grumpy boy this morning, and opening this with saying that this person says the N-word to black people with the hard R and is racist might have been a slight overstatement. I have no actual evidence that she does that. She might, though. I can't prove that she hasn't. We're having our coffee now, okay?
of difference between these two spaces and the issues with both. But even more importantly, secondly, I'm not interested in Vaush specifically here with the discussion in this video. My goal here is more just to spark a conversation that Vaush currently is a part of and represents, and to try to build a conversation that is constructive rather than adversarial. This is not my takedown video of Vaush or anything like that, nor am I ever probably going to make a video like that, but it is just my video to discuss dynamics of trying to address transphobia expressed by gender-critical folks like J.K. Rowling, who are themselves part of a hate movement targeting trans people. So if you're here from Vaush's audience, I welcome you to disagree with me, because this should be a conversation, and don't take this as Jesse Gender takes down Vaush. I am so incredibly disinterested in that sort of online discourse, because it's ultimately missing the point. I'm just using this instance and Vaush's arguments as examples of how these things are discussed in larger context. He's just the most recent example and the most directly pertinent to the space that I'm in as a fellow YouTuber. But with all those caveats out of the way, let's actually take a look at Vaush's arguments here surrounding supporting tweets like this towards J.K. Rowling.
J.K. Rowling, not a great person. Beefed with me on Twitter. You see, there I was innocently tweeting out misogynistic stuff on International Women's Day. All J.K. Rowling had to do was shut the F up. I see you, YouTube. And she would have been almost uncritically beloved for like a century. Women be quieter and start apologizing challenge. Phenomenal stuff. The joke here being, of course, that a common slogan for women's liberation is women be loud, stop apologizing, a sentiment which I agree with, in most cases, unless you're J.K. Rowling. So, ironic misogyny, send tweet, very funny, haha, Vaush problematic, I get it, Acting as though I was... God, I'm so fucking good. Isn't it incredible how through the tone with which I explain even the basic context of the situation that my point isn't defending the ironic misogyny itself? Oh my God. I'm so good. It's so obvious from the way that I talk about it that the point here isn't a defense of the actual tweets. All right. Being misogynistic directly to J.K. Rowling as opposed to tweeting about the billionaire author just indirectly, right? Like, just to be clear on what we're talking about here, we are just talking about tweets thrown into the ether, which she screenshotted. So not to say that doesn't mean it's not misogynistic or whatever, but there are people in my subreddit who are like, where was that thread? Because I scroll through it, right? Where it was like, Vaush really messed up the optics on this one. He really couldn't have handled this one worse. Oh yeah, Vaush handled the J.K. Rowling drama poorly. I don't know how I could handle it poorly because there wasn't really drama. I just tweeted something and then she screenshotted it, like they're presupposing her screenshotting it as though that was something I anticipated. Like, can you imagine if everything we all said or did was subjected to the optical scrutiny of being screenshotted by... All right, this has been too much of my content in a row with no interruption. I'm DMCAing this video. It's over for Jesse Gender. It's all over. Somebody with 14 million Twitter followers. Like imagine anytime anyone on the left posts anything like, oh, well, you better watch out. You might get screenshotted by J.K. Rowling.
So number one, he's arguing here that his intention for the tweet was not for it to be seen by her, but that he was originally tweeting it ironically as a joke for others to sort of reinforce this idea that J.K. Rowling shouldn't be speaking up about trans issues because she's a transphobe, using kind of sexist jokes and rhetoric in order to portray that. However, after he tweeted that, J.K. Rowling was looking around Twitter for people to point to and say, hey, look at this man being sexist towards me. Aren't all trans people and their allies just misogynistic? And Vaush argues that she was going to be looking for that all the same in order to fuel her narrative. It's something that she's done over and over and over again, and his was just the most recent one. She basically is using Vaush's tweet like she's used a bunch of other tweets in a sort of optical battle, one that frames trans people and our allies.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm so sorry. This happened literally the day of. I don't know. I wish I could find it. It was literally the day of me making the videos, or after, I think. J.K. Rowling was quote tweeted some tiny trans account that called J.K. Rowling a cishet. Like the trans person said, okay, cishet, and J.K. Rowling quote tweeted it, essentially treated it like she'd been called a slur, and bullied that account into deleting. The thing that I said as an example, hey, J.K. Rowling will use literally any innocuous behavior as an example of misogyny against real women, and bully like smaller accounts. Like, that's my point. She was going to do that no matter what. Why not? Listen, okay, all I'm going to say is this, all right? When J.K. Rowling bullies a small trans account into deleting on Twitter, that's a Tuesday. When she screenshots me, that's a Newsweek article, okay? That's all I'm saying, all right? That's a Wikipedia article being made on me, which did get approved right after that happened, okay? And to a transphobe, I genuinely don't think me saying women shut up is any worse than calling a person a cishet. I think actually saying cis is, like, to them worse. Because if J.K. Rowling actually cared about misogyny, she wouldn't do what she does, you know? That's almost all conservatives who back her.
As inherently sexist, and that trans women like me are somehow wielding misogyny in order to attack the quote-unquote true victims, namely the narrow amount of people that J.K. Rowling labels as women. We'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that in just a little bit. But Vaush essentially states that his tweet was ironic and meant for a different audience than what it was co-opted for by Rowling, and wasn't even directed at her, which would have had different implications if he knew that it was going to be retweeted by her. And here Vaush is actually 100% correct. The goal of TERF movements and many sort of right-wing movements that attack marginalized groups is to try to frame the discussion in a new way, as in this case women versus trans women, who they see as and state are just men. It's basically trying to create a call to war rhetoric and framing where trans women are made to seem at direct odds with the rights of cisgender women. For example, TERFs will argue and say things like gender ideology is taking away the rights of women. But this is, in fact, a false framing because it ignores how trans women face similar issues as cisgender women do. Both trans
This actually seems hella fair. Yeah, so far it's been good.
transgender and cisgender women, for example, face high levels of sexual assault, discrimination in the workplace, or ignorance of our healthcare needs. These issues often overlap for trans women and cisgender women, though sometimes presenting in different ways for each group. But on top of that, trans women and trans people in general will also face additional challenges stemming from misogyny, but also transphobia and misinformation about trans people. So the issue and the real framing in reality isn't trans women versus women, but women, trans and cisgender, facing systems that make invisible issues of misogyny and transphobia as well. But J.K. Rowling and other gender-critical women have defined women as only through the lens by which they experience it, as only the misogyny that she, as a white cisgender upper-class woman, has faced. Which, to be fair, she most definitely
Okay, I'm only at 1.2 times speed. Does Jesse Gender normally talk quickly? I gotta find out. Wait. Okay, we're at 1 times.
has faced. I mean, honestly and truly, my heart breaks to hear the story of J.K. Rowling's sexual assault, for example, and I wish it was something that she never had to face. She definitely has suffered misogyny within our world today. But that being said, the pain and suffering that she has faced as a woman is not the only way that
Maybe she doesn't talk super fast naturally, just her cadence lends itself towards fast talking.
women can be harmed. And trans women may face similar things and sexual assault like Rowling did, but also further things as well that are specific to trans people. Regardless though, gender critical women and Rowling and hate movements like this try to frame the discussion this way, around one version of womanhood and one version of womanhood alone, defining womanhood only in that way, and often stemming out of a traumatic situation that they may have faced, using it to justify that this is the only way that a woman can be because look, I face misogyny too. So in order to reinforce that worldview, Rowling and many gender critical folks will look online for people enacting sexism in trans people's names, trans or not, to misrepresent trans people as misogynistic in order to reinforce their only point that trans people are inherently misogynistic and don't understand what it's like to really be a woman in their mind. So Vaush is 100% correct when he articulates that in his video. But then he continues his argument with this
misogynistic shitpost, and I feel like if they got targeted by Rowling, we wouldn't be hand-wringing like this. Like, in ContraPoints' video on J.K. Rowling, she went over tweets of people being, like, really aggressive towards J.K. Rowling, like death threats and stuff, you know? And while Contra acknowledged that these were, like, harmful and bad, you know, she didn't really seem to want to focus the video on a condemnation of that behavior because, as she stressed, right, J.K. Rowling is a billionaire with incredible social power. In a way, you're really doing her a favor by pretending that tweeting something problematic with her name involved in it is somehow a concession given to her point. Like, let me give you guys a hint, all right? J.K. Rowling doesn't care about misogyny. You can read her books. They're not exactly, like, super progressive. She doesn't care. She cares about trans people and oppressing them. That's the thing she cares about. And this whole TERF movement is really just a conservative psyop with a very small minority of second-wave feminists being signal boosted by conservative media. Are there, like, mainstream feminist, like, you know, groups that are advocating for any proof of this? I beg you guys, okay? Find large groups of TERFs who are politically active in the left and are also TERFs. It's very difficult. They exist, but they are very, very few in number. All of the popular TERFs, all of the ones who are loud and well-known, all the ones with any media attention given to them, are very concretely aligned with the right. Very, very concretely aligned. It's not even close. TERF stuff, some, yeah, but overwhelmingly, when J.K. Rowling says, Jesse Gender is in chat, in my site chat, you didn't put a space between Jesse and oh, no, wait, it doesn't link to a user thing. In my YouTube chat? I don't see anyone. Wait, does she have the check mark? No check mark! Listen, alright? I don't give a shit, alright? I only respect Verified YouTubers. All right? Oh, wait, in site chat. Oh. Hey, Jesse Gender. I was very grumpy at the beginning of the stream, and I accused you of racism. I don't think you're racist, though, so I retracted that. Anyway, let's continue. Something transphobic and gets retweeted, signal boosted, has videos made about them. It's from conservatives, people who are often fascists. I mean, a lot of these people think women should be barefoot and pregnant. J.K. Rowling doesn't denounce the support because J.K. Rowling doesn't care that it's coming from them. She cares about support for her transphobia. So, a couple of points to that effect. First of all, conservatives don't care about misogyny. The only reason they prop up TERFs is because, well, it's the same reason they prop up Candace Owens, right? And Candace Owens accuses the Democrats of being racist, while herself never criticizing or condemning the much more overt racism from the Republicans. It's a shield. It's a way of using woke language to form a wedge against... Let me see. Well, I appreciate that, but yeah, I do hope the video's taken good faith. It wasn't intended to attack, just create convo. Oh no, Jesse Gender, so far the video is good. I woke up on the wrong side of the bed this morning. I probably would have called you racist at the beginning even if I hadn't, but I would have done it in a slightly more funny way, which would have made people, you know, like it would have, you know, better ameliorated the opening to the, yeah. Okay, just, yeah. No, it's good. Okay, here, just nothing if not consistent. Yeah, a sleep-deprived Vaush is a deeply unfunny Vaush. Okay, let's see. It can be a fast talker. Hi, Jesse Gender. Oh, well, thank you for joining the site chat. Here, stay with us for a bit if you're not busy. Okay. You know, progressive politics, a way of separating people by invoking contrary language to defend a conservative talking point.
So moving on from this, his next point is that Rowling and those who use TERF movements don't actually care about misogyny at all, but they just wield these movements and rhetoric optically to feed their more right-wing and often fascist movements. And again, on this point, I entirely agree with Vaush. In fact, I did this whole video on the TERF to fascist...
I'm sorry, wait, I just have to say, now the shitpost. I won't ban you, because I love you. However, Jesse Gender, congrats on having one of the 3 good faith Vaush critique videos in like the whole internet. We're past the good faith arc, okay? I don't give a shit whether or not people are good faith anymore, okay? I care whether or not they're right, and the only way to be right is to be me, okay? I care about whether or not they're me. We're anti-everyone and everything else, all right? Just, we got to move past. Nothing against this video, you know. I guess everyone's standard for what good faith discourse is different, so it's like, I feel like I've spent the past 3 years, or like my subreddit is like, here's a good faith argument against Vaush, finally. And then I open up the video, and it's like, Tyrone. Bad faith, fascist Vaush. Vaush bad. Vaush bad. Like that, or something. I'm like, well, you know. I guess. Thank you. Thanks for the good faith discourse. Where's that Tyrone video, dude? Where can somebody link it? I know there are several, but the one I'm referring to I have the link to that. It's like here's my good faith engagement. Oh yeah, here we go. It's my subreddit. We finally found a good faith criticism.
Vaush is a transphobic rat liberal cocksock dem. Yours truly, the CIA Kropotkin, Marxist, Leninist, tanky problematist. Vaush bad, Vaush rad, Vaush bad, Vaush bad, Vaush rad. By the way, Alden's number is a grift.
I'm so glad that I don't have whatever social defect causes people to not stand up for themselves, because if I didn't have as much of a backbone as I did, I feel like I would watch these videos given to me by my audience and claiming their good faith, and I'd have to go like, well, thank you guys. Not this. This video is good faith. I'm just using this as an example. Sorry. All right, moving on. Moving on.
Pipeline that you should check out if you're more interested in the nuance and specifics of that discussion. But I do think it misses how these systems and optics work and reinforce themselves and who they're ultimately for. But before we get to that, to get points to Vaush, he is right here. Many conservatives and far-right movements platform and support TERF movements because it helps further a culture war narrative of women versus trans people that we talked about before, one that ultimately feeds their goals. Take, for example, how the Heritage Foundation, which has actively supported the removal of abortion rights in the United States, has platformed TERFs before. Or how ultra-conservative anti-abortion religious groups have often attempted to fund gender-critical groups and movements. Or take
J.K. Rowling did this meme just the other day. She retweeted and not retweeted, said "I love you" to a tradcath, like an actual honest to god. I'm pretty sure this lady's like Nick Fuentes tier, or like maybe not that far, but like in the area. Yeah, the Citizen Go. See, to CF Faro, big love to you XXX. This is like 2 days ago. Caroline Farrow, UK and Ireland campaign director at Citizen Go, mum of 5, wife of RC priest, allergic to non-biblical rainbows. Citizen Go is an ultra-conservative advocacy group founded in Spain by the ultra-Catholic and far-right Hazteur. I don't know. The foundation promotes petitions in 50 countries, opposes same-sex marriage, abortion, and euthanasia. Yeah, like... Oh, sorry, Jesse. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty bad. What the fuck are biblical rainbows? There's an element of the homophobic Christian right that resents the fact that rainbows, which they consider to be a natural gift from God, have been co-opted as a symbol for, you know, gay rights and stuff. So what they're saying is they're allergic to like LGBT people. Really? Yeah, no, that's real. Yeah. Yeah, they say, yeah, God created rainbows after Noah's flood. Yeah. They get really mad over that.
How the Proud Boys, a far-right extremist terrorist group in the United States, who often argue for a return to fundamentalist gender roles for women as solely domestic, fought alongside TERFs in riots and protests against trans people.
True.
They do this because these groups understand that the framing of trans women versus women that TERFs try to push can be wielded to vilify trans people, who by our very existence deconstruct these traditionalist gender roles, so vilifying us is actually reinforcing gendered positions, which is something that Vaush gets at this point in his video.
That conservatives don't care about misogyny, conservatives care about degeneracy. Or to put it another way, if J.K. Rowling had found a tweet being critical of her, and then had screenshotted it and then followed that up with the Avi, the profile picture of that Twitter user, and it was like a trans person with 18 septum piercings, pink hair, or like, you know, whatever else, that optically would have been as bad or worse from her side of the aisle than me being misogynistic.
And again, I entirely agree with his point here. Many conservatives automatically equate just being transgender with degeneracy, and so just looking like a stereotypical transgender woman optically, quote unquote, is bad to conservatives and is automatically seen as a bad thing. It's okay.
Yeah, I've said this before, but like, so conservatives will give people on the left shit if they're accused of being racist or sexist or whatever, but the vibe I get in their communities are that the only reason they pretend to care about this is because they think it's hypocrisy, right? Like, I saw the discourse every time I was accused of racism against people on the right, and people on the right aren't like, wow, I'm outraged by racism. They were like, wow, so hypocritical of Vaush, who says racism is bad, but then does racism by, I don't know, I've been racist like 4,000 times according to, like, they don't actually care, it's just a dunk, right? Like, so to them, accusations that somebody on the left has been a bigot, that's like a dunk. They're trying to get a dunk on you, but they don't really care, right? Now, if they take a picture of an unattractive trans woman after that trans woman makes an argument against them that they don't have an answer to, and they make fun of that trans woman's appearance, that right there is something they care about. That isn't a dunk. They actually care about that. They are passionate about hating that trans woman, okay? They are dedicated. They're committed, you know? They're ideologues. They're passionate. And I think that's the critical difference, I think, in a lot of respects. Yeah, here. I see, Jesse. You're skedaddling before we get to the part where you emphatically disagree with me, so you can avoid my heated requests for a debate. I see. No, of course. Jesse, have a wonderful day.
This is how being trans is automatically equated with something to be laughed at or vilified within conservative circles. And then more importantly, reinforce conservatives in power who use these cultural war fights to rally their base and distract from more pertinent issues and keep themselves
Based
in
on
power.
what?
And this tactic of vilifying trans people in order to bolster their own power and distract from other more pertinent issues is a commonly used tactic right now for conservative and right-wing movements. Take, for example, how there are numerous anti-transgender laws around the United States being pushed by conservatives so they can scare their base with the dangerous transes so that their base will come vote for them in the next election, while also ignoring the need for laws for better healthcare, election reform, climate change legislation, etc., which would hurt these politicians' wallets and powerful positions. So in all this, Vaush is actually 100% correct. These groups, these conservative people, don't really care about misogyny. They're just wielding turf rhetoric and turf movements in order to bolster their own power and their base. But at the end of the day, does this justify wielding sexism to push back against turfs or J.K. Rowling? To my mind, I don't think it does. And before we go further into Vaush's argument, I actually want to take a little bit of a sidestep to use a different example of a similar dynamic.
So with the provided caveats here, I don't necessarily disagree, only insofar as it's acknowledged that my argument wasn't a justification. My justification for being misogynistic is that I want to, and that's all I need, and no one will ever drag me off of that hill. Because it gives me pleasure to do so. But that's not really like a strong moral argument, you know. It's more about the broader. I do appreciate. I mean, she acknowledged that, like, in an optical sense, like if we're talking, the point is that it's the optics, right? Like if we acknowledge that the optical concerns were overstated, you know.
Dynamic in order to kind of discuss the issues inherent in this whole entire framing, I think. And that example is by me asking a slightly similar but different question. Would it be okay of me, for example, to be racist to someone like Dave Chappelle for his use of transphobia?
Okay, I'm gonna keep it 100 with you guys. Optically, it'd be pretty bad, but I don't care personally. All right, my personal opinion, I don't care as long as it's directed in a way. You can do it in ways that are pretty funny, right? So a good example of this would be, if you listen, okay, what you guys need is a tactical black friend. All right, because if you meet somebody who you got some real edgy ones you want to drop, you need them, okay, to do it for you. All right, you guys know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. You need like a buddy, a tactical friend. Well, they can say it. I can't say it. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Okay, listen, all I'm saying is, all right, listen, the Boondocks is just chock full of great insults that I can't use, all right, but other people can. That's what I'm saying, all right. It's very much a proxy thing. You mean this? How a white man says the N-word to a black man. What? The Laugh Factory. I don't know what this is. Is this copyright? I took my damn earbuds out again.
Rocky bottom shoes.
Dude, where my money? I need my money right now.
You don't have to be talking to me like that.
Nigga.
All right. Moving on.
Would it be okay for me to use racist rhetoric to confront Dave Chappelle?
Not you.
I mean, the justification that Vaush is using against J.K. Rowling could be the same here. The conservatives who utilize Dave Chappelle's rhetoric don't care about racism. I mean, look at the fact that many right-wing folks like Ben Shapiro or Tucker Carlson came to Chappelle's defense, attacking and vilifying trans people, saying that we were just trying to cancel Chappelle. But then these same people in different places would go on to argue that systemic racist systems don't exist, for example. They also argue for legislation that would limit voting rights for people of color. It showcases the fact that they don't actually care about racism, but what they do care about is utilizing the culture war rhetoric of black people versus trans people to vilify trans people to stoke their base and gain attention for their news programs or their own power.
Wait!
Like, actually, all I care about in regards to the N-word is whether or not I can reasonably believe that you're using it to, like, actually make fun of black people. Bernie Sanders has the pass on God. As much as like I have disagreements, Vaush has the pass. If Vaush says the N-word next to me or whatever, I'm just be like, whatever. Because there's just no shot that guy, I believe, at least, I don't think there's a realistic way that guy hates black people. With some of the arguments that he makes and shit, he makes some edgy-ass fucking jokes. That's the type of dude that probably in some circles does say the N-word in private. I don't think he's a racist dude. I just don't care.
Damn. It's time, boys. It's time. That pass ain't universal, though. We'll just assume it's universal. Vaush, wait, no. You gain the power. Yeah. Okay, can we agree Bernie Sanders has the pass? Come on.
And conservative politicians often do the same thing, railing against woke culture in order to bolster their own base. So, with that being said, that similar dynamic being in play, you could argue that my being racist toward Chappelle just confront Chappelle in a way that doesn't feed into their narrative, as Vaush argues with Rowling. But if I did do that, number one, it would feed that rhetoric because it would feed.
I think the equivalent that you could do with Dave Chappelle, which would be like racially charged, but would be, I think, like defensible in a moral sense, you know, would be something like after Dave Chappelle like does all that shit, you could tweet something like, you know, black men go through one struggle and think they have the right to speak over everyone else's. Like that's pretty edgy, right? I don't know if that's necessarily racist, but I know that Dave Chappelle would accuse that person of being racist for saying that. You know what I mean? I don't know. Artemy, you jumped on the computer.
Feed that idea that I was a trans person who was being racist toward Chappelle, feeding into that framing of black people versus trans people. It would allow the optics of the situation to be wielded to order to vilify me and trans people like me.
Fat baby.
And you know what? The thing is, they would be right to do so because I would be being racist, which is just flat out wrong. You don't get to use racism just because it's a cheap dig at someone that you disagree with.
So this I do just disagree with, you know? If you're like short phobic, like if you're like lookist or whatever to Ben Shapiro, if you make a small dick joke about Trump and like they get mad about that, or like let's be real, Trump Jr. would be more likely, I guess, in this case. Like I think you can recognize that there are it's acceptable to criticize some modes of behavior, but the context in which you criticize them, it has to be done in the right time and place, you know? And you doing that like to the detriment of forming a unified front against like a massive bigot, I think is probably not good, you know? Why do I take my earbuds out? Why do I do that?
You don't get to take away someone's humanity and attack them for who they are in order to just win points in a debate. Not just because it optically is bad, but because it is actually inherently wrong, and you don't dehumanize people regardless of whether or not you agree or disagree with them. But this is something that happens to all.
I don't know if I agree with the dehumanized language. The language of the tweet was pretty tongue-in-cheek. It was just a reverse of an existing slogan for women's rights in the context of speaking about a woman who weaponizes feminism to attack trans people. I don't know if dehumanization is on the table here necessarily.
All forms of marginalized people when someone disagrees with us. The first thing that is used to attack a marginalized person is to take away their humanity through their identity. I mean, we talk about how it happens to trans people, how our humanity is taken away from us if we don't perform exactly how we're supposed to. This happens very obviously in right-wing spaces. I mean, take a look at how Caitlyn Jenner is often misgendered by right-wing people despite her constantly reinforcing transphobic and right-wing narratives and talking points. But this also happens within leftist spaces too. Take, for example, how when a trans person who worked as a moderator for the more left-leaning anti-work subreddit appeared on Fox News and badly articulated the position of the subreddit, leading to a temporary implosion of that subreddit. That trans person after that event was repeatedly misgendered and attacked because they didn't perform correctly or do as good a job as they were supposed to. And what this does is underline how transphobia...
Go on. Doesn't your position here kind of go against this tweet? No, because J.K. Rowling did see my tweet. Sorry, listen, okay? if you want me to be some kind of like hyper consistent, like moral abacus brained individual, then you're gonna have to leave, because no one's like that. Like, I obviously make casually misogynistic jokes sometimes, but this was making fun of like raping a child in prison, you know? Like, I don't know. I think that's different. I think so. I guess my position, and you can call me a hypocrite if you want, but like, I think it's disgusting for a person to go on social media and joke about a child being raped in prison. And I don't think it's disgusting to go on social media and make jokes about women shutting up. Like, it's not great to do the ironic misogyny, but I feel like you're touching on such a worse issue in the relationship between that sentiment and the language expressed, you know? But I mean, like, yeah, if I was a perfect moral arbiter, then I would never be problematic in any sense. I wouldn't use terms like stupid or crazy either, because those are definitionally ableist. And I don't mean to do this reductio ad absurdum bit. Like, those terms are ableist. I feel like all of us engage in a kind of, you know, we draw the line for where we think it's acceptable to engage in like some level of problematic behavior. And it's always going to be a little arbitrary. We can make arguments for why we think, well, here's too far and here's not. But at the end of the day, I'm comfortable with where I am. But making jokes about kids getting raped in prison is like miles beyond wherever I am, right? So there's just an arbitrary line of morality? No, it's not an arbitrary line of morality. It's an arbitrary line of acceptable bad behavior. Please, let's not get into the normative ethics part of this, okay? Like, we're talking about the utilitarian benefit of severe social condemnation for certain types of arbitrarily bad behaviors over other types of arbitrarily bad behaviors. If you want to get into the ethics on this, we're going to be talking about it for 30 minutes. In terms of the practicality, like, I think there's a difference here. Morality is arbitrary? Well, if you're a moral anti-realist, then yeah. Normative ethics is going to break chat. Yeah. All right, just let's chill.
Is implicit within leftist spaces, number one, and within our culture in general, and how trans people often have to perform well in order just to get our humanity respected. And that is wrong. You can have criticisms of a person, but you don't get to use transphobia to dehumanize them in order to make a point or make them feel bad for having done something wrong or made mistakes. But before we dive into that, let me just return back to Dave Chappelle to continue on this point, though. Chappelle did a lot of harm that perpetuated transphobia, as I've spoke about in my initial video on his special. But also, within that video, I also pointed out that Chappelle also did have a point when he spoke about how many privileged white LGBTQ folks will also perpetuate racism. For example, he made a really good—
No, okay, okay, wait, I'll let her finish the point, but I disagree on this.
Point about how many white LGBTQ people will call the cops on him if they feel uncomfortable with a black man in their space, despite the fact that they are LGBTQ and should understand the same marginalization that he feels as a black man, at least understand the same systems.
Then, right when you think we would fight, guess what he did? He picked up his phone and he called the police.
Vaush, I feel like you need to clarify here that ironic misogyny is a lot more normalized and easily recognized than ironic racism and risks doing a lot less harm. It's cause you kind of did just say it's okay. Risks doing a lot less harm. Okay, I'm about to show my whole ass here, but I want to give you guys the reason why I'm okay with ironic misogyny far more than ironic racism, okay? And it's that, like, and I think this is probably the experience that a lot of you guys have had as well, but like, I feel like with ironic misogyny, as long as you have a general vibe check on the person, it's pretty easy to tell when it betrays actual, real, like, hatred of women, or even, like, real negative attitudes towards them, you know? Attitudes towards sex and gender, and jokes making fun of the dynamic between men and women and how absurd those dynamics are really old, and there are so many incarnations of them that have persisted even after sexism became, well, more unacceptable than it used to be. And I hear so many of these jokes all the time, and I feel like I can usually pretty easily tell, like, okay, not a big deal, not as much of a deal. That's not to say that it can't still be problematic, or that you have the 100% perfect ability to find out whether or not a joke is really a joke, or even that something being ironic means it holds no
social weight. Even if all of the jokes about women are fully ironic, being made by people who aren't personally sexist, it can still be grating to hear that as a woman. And that's why in my case, my threshold for a lot of this behavior, for whether or not ironic misogyny is okay, and this may seem like a dumb threshold, but I actually think it's the best one, is it funny? Because in my experience, bigots will use ironic misogyny all the time as a way of getting away with expressing that bigotry, but they don't care about making it funny. They just care about being able to be misogynistic in a socially acceptable way. So they'll do it all the time when it's not funny, and it's like, it's a lot like 4chan humor, right? Can you make funny jokes that are racially charged or even racist? Yes, they're done oftentimes. Have you watched Blazing Saddles? Like, yeah, it's happened. But oftentimes the people who make racist jokes, clearly the joke portion isn't what's getting them going, right? Yeah, like George Floyd tier stuff, right? Listen, in private, I have laughed at edgy jokes about George Floyd because it's a really dark situation and dark humor can be funny, and I'm fine with that, all right? But I've seen a lot of George Floyd jokes online, and I gotta say 99.99% of the time, they're so unfunny that I really feel like the humor portion is not the prioritized element. It's actually about getting to mock the victim of a police murder and a black man. Like, overwhelmingly, that's it, This is a subjective process, what you find funny and what you can determine from people's behavior. But the thing with ironic racism, is that so rarely do I see it invoked in a way which I would consider to be, like, part of an acceptable attitude. Or, like, I don't know. How do I put it? Like, I don't know, man. If I'm just hanging out with, like, a coworker, like back when I had coworkers, and someone made a joke, like they were talking about how they went on a date last night, it didn't go well, and I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, and they're like, women. Like, well, that is sexist. They're generalizing the behavior of one woman to all women, but okay, right? But if it was like a Mexican woman they went out with, and I was like, oh, I'm sorry, and they're like, oh, Mexicans, I'd be like, what do you mean by that exactly? Technically, if you're just to distill everything down and remove all social context, those two things are exactly the same, right? In both cases, they took the behavior of one individual, part of a group, and generalized it, sort of half-mockingly, to a broader group. But judging from your behavior in chat, you agree, that kind of feels worse, doesn't it? The reasons why they feel different, the level of social acceptability, the normalization, the ingraining into our behavior, these things are incredibly complicated, and I can't fully explore them. I just want to point out that I do feel like engaging in some ironic sexism is not the same as, like, full-on dog whistle posting, like, race, I just want to point out that there's a difference. I feel like you can ascertain a decent level of, to me, it feels completely the same. I mean, yeah, I can't really argue against that. I don't feel that it feels the same. Those feel very different to me.
Systems.
Then, right when you think we would fight, guess what he did? He picked up his phone and he called the police. And this thing I'm describing is a major issue that I have with that community. Gay people are minorities until they need to be white again.
He makes an excellent point how racism can still thrive within LGBTQ spaces as...
So I actually don't like this point, because Dave Chappelle is saying something which is correct in the service of a bigoted point. And that's the difference, right? I think that you should never gotta hand it to them when a person pushing for a bad cause makes an internal point within that cause that is correct. Like, you can acknowledge that point right there is correct, but you don't have to do it in defense of what they're saying, right? Like, you don't have to hand it to them. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Obviously, this is using, like, an incredibly hyperbolic example, right? But it's almost like he made the trains run on time Mussolini argument. Of course, in reality, he didn't, actually. He didn't improve the civic infrastructure of Italy at all. But it's like one of those...
suspicious willingness to give credit where credit is due when it's possible to acknowledge that point in a way that doesn't reaffirm. Do you guys understand what I'm talking about? I hope you understand what I'm talking about here. So, like, does J.K. Rowling have a point that ironic misogyny can be bad? Yes, but I would rather die than allow that to be the context in which we have that conversation. You know, I would imagine if I'm talking to a neo-Nazi, which I have on this stream, and they're like, well, you have to acknowledge that, like, these black people that I'm talking about, they do listen to misogynistic music, and so if you're principled and you're anti-bigotry, then you have to recognize that's a problem. And then I'm like, okay, well, I acknowledge that there's problematic behavior, and I think that's a good point. And then, because now I've given him the floor, he gets to direct the conversation towards that. You're giving them the room. The correct response to me, like, in my mind, anytime any argument like that is made, is to recognize that even if an internal component of a bad political position is consistent and correct, you don't have to give them credit there. You can fight against the broader point and then address the caveats afterwards. Does that make sense? This is your brain on debate? No, I think that's a good idea. I think it's good. Like, otherwise, bigots of every kind will always be able to find some inconsistency, some edge case counter-argument, and force you to focus on that rather than their broader point. There will always be some side thing. Yeah, exactly. Like an anti-immigration guy or a conservative who wants to, like, close the borders, pointing out that Muslims tend to be homophobic when they come in from the Middle East. Like, yeah, that's true. The Middle East isn't great to gay people, generally speaking, but I am not going to gotta hand it to him, for that point, Or, like, imagine if a conservative said that you were homophobic because you said you don't care if Muslim refugees coming in from Syria into America were illiberal and not progressive. And they're like, well, I think it's very homophobic of you to disregard the harm you can cause gay people by bringing in, Muslim refugees who might want to throw me off rooftops. And technically, the point they're making is true. It is true. Gay people might have a legitimate qualm with that. That is fair to make. I just don't care. Because they're misdirecting. They're using that edge case as a way of focusing attention on an adjacent point by ignoring the broader. Do you guys understand? This is Destiny level justification of edgy humor? What the f are you talking about? Listen, if you all want to chug your fucking Soylent and, like, cry about me making a misogynistic joke that wouldn't have got me kicked out of a fucking book club, all right? Then you can go do so on Twitter, all right? Jesus Christ. How do people come to watch me when this is the level of sensitivity? Like, how? It's black on black crime the lib version? Yeah, it is black on black crime the lib version, Well, if you care about crime so much, why don't you care about black people killing black people? Like, the correct answer to that is choke to death on my shit. Not, oh, wow, you're so correct. That's a point that you have, yeah.
I talked about with trans people and transphobia in left-leaning spaces. It showcases how Dave Chappelle, while his rhetoric is wielded by right-wing movements in order to attack and vilify trans people, does actually care about and have salient points about racism and how it appears in different areas and groups. However, the mistake and problem that he made was that he framed this whole conversation in a way that ubiquitized all trans people and all LGBTQ people as, one, monolithically white, ignoring that trans people of color exist and all are also intersectionally marginalized, and two, flattened the entire trans community as simply racist, misunderstanding how often LGBTQ people, white or not, often work in coalition with black movements and vice versa. He also misunderstood how racism can be systemic and both perpetuated and fought against within communities and even within singular people. how people can express racist ideas but also push back against racism at the same time, because humans are complex and contradictory in numerous ways.
Oh my
It's a
God, thank
complex
you so
interplay and
much.
conversation about how racism, both personal and systemic, still exists within all marginalized spaces, communities, or movements, and yet cannot simply be stated as all racist or not racist, nor erase the intersectionality of the people involved, which Chappelle did do, framing race, sexuality, and gender as all separate forces that don't ever interact with each other, and him prioritizing racial issues that he faced as a black man above all others, ignoring how it would be faced for a trans black woman, for example. But in reality, it doesn't have to be a hierarchy, and also these forces like gender, sexuality, and race intersect with each other in different ways that privilege some and disenfranchise.
Okay, I agree with all of this. Yeah, I think these are good arguments.
Others. And so we can bring that same idea and talk about it with J.K. Rowling. The whole intent of TERF/gender critical rhetoric, as I said before, is to frame the issue of trans people versus women, framing misogyny as the singular concern that women face in their minds, without recognizing the intersection of how trans women face both transphobia and misogyny, and that this transphobia and misogyny presents itself in ways both similar to and different from how cis white women would experience the same thing. This isn't to say that misogyny that J.K. Rowling and TERFs like her have faced isn't legitimate, but ignores that trans people, like myself, have also faced.
Pointing out something correct a bigot said isn't the same as giving them that one, as long as you point out what Vaush said, that they use edge cases to support a false narrative. In a vacuum, in a direct one-on-one debate, that is correct. In a direct one-on-one conversation, it is possible to hear out a full bad argument from a bigot and to go, that one point you made is correct, however, it doesn't mean what you think it means, and to provide a counter-argument. But that example falls apart through the language and logistics of social media, where nobody can control who platforms who or which engagement takes place with who, especially when one person, Rowling, is so much larger than any other figure involved. And I think, personally, it's just highly inappropriate to, because, like, let's be real here, the response from the broader online left when J.K. Rowling showed her ass was to condemn me. Were you guys following the trending tag? Everyone else on the left. At most, it was, wow, J.K. Rowling and Vaush against each other, you know, two evil people. And at worst, it was just attacking me. First of all, acting like I was giving her optical fuel, which, again, I wasn't. I have, as far as I'm concerned, thoroughly debunked that position. You could call J.K. Rowling a bigot, and she would call that a slur. In fact, I'm pretty sure she's done that before. The optical fuel that J.K. Rowling needs is the existence of trans people and pro-trans people. Okay, that's it. That's it. That's the only thing she needs. That's her optical fuel. All right, you will never be able to civility politics your way into transphobes not hating you. Dr. Martin Luther King died like with 2/3 of the country hating him. Okay, it's just not happening. So the optical stuff not there, but I think personally it's indicative of a serious problem that people in the online left, given that opportunity, like, can you imagine if they fell behind me? Not just for my sake. Let's ignore the clout or whatever. I have enough clout as it is. But in terms of, like, a rallying moment, a member of the online left, whether they like it or not, clearly upset the most powerful voice for transphobia on the planet. I made her angry. And what's more, I got probably one of the largest, like, counter responses to her that's happened in a long time. Don't you think it would have been, like, if the broader attitude had been, I don't like Vaush's sexism here, but Lamau, look at how mad J.K. Rowling is, I would have been fine with that. I would have honestly found it kind of heartwarming, like, okay, I'll take the hit, fine, I'm sorry about the ironic sexism, but yeah, look at us, we're making fun of J.K. Rowling. It would have been a pretty cool rallying moment. I think it would have done a lot for broader unity, and I think it would have been more politically expedient than, in a time where news articles are being written about this tweet exchange, attacking the not J.K. Rowling person. That's the issue that I have. If the rest of the online left had acted in a sensible way, as far as I'm concerned, acted in a anti-transphobia way, which would have meant siding with me here, emphatically, aggressively, not getting dragged down by the minute disagreements and focusing on the larger picture, then this wouldn't really be an issue. Yeah, it could have been a great opportunity to call J.K. Rowling out even further. And I won't lie, I think that in terms of my optimism for engaging with people on the left, can you blame me for thinking lowly of them when I'm so despised by them that from their perspective, the best case scenario is them equivocating me and J.K. Rowling, and the worst case is them attacking me instead of J.K. Rowling. Like, I'm sorry, given this environment, I've said this before, but like, I'm pretty sure if I went to some BLM rally and like got in a conflict and punched some Nazis and got punched back, if there was a news article written, you know, controversial live streamer has nose broken, you know, breaks guy's clavicle, you know, I'm pretty sure that the discourse around that would be, wow, Vaush fighting his own. Like, I really do think the online left hates me so much that any demonstration of positive or emphatic or energizing or engaged activist behavior on my part will just be like another thing they can attack me for. So in that environment, I think my criticisms here are completely warranted and are completely valid. And if people think I'm dying on this hill, just make sure you understand the hill I'm dying on is not ironic misogyny is good and funny. That's just not the point here. The hill I'm dying on is that the online left is toxic and cancerous as f***, and genuinely doesn't deserve the good work that I do for it. But tirelessly, like a priest on a hill, who's dedicated his life to the goodness of all and to Christ, okay? I continue. I suffer for you, and all I get in return for it is enormous amounts of fame and money. Just, that's, truly I am Christ-like in my, in my advocacy. Lest I get, you know, lest I get too much hot air in my head. Oh.
Sexual assault, face higher degrees of assault in general, and also have added transphobic harassment and attacks on our rights and physical bodies for being trans as well. What it does is showcase how, like Dave Chappelle, actually does care about racism, but misses the intersectionality of it, how gender-critical folks like J.K. Rowling do care about misogyny, but miss how it actually represents in marginalized groups other than themselves. So to weaponize sexism in the name of trans women not only ignores that trans women will often suffer from that same sexism ourselves and don't wish to have it perpetuated in our name, but also feeds into this idea that trans women don't actually face sexism, and how that gets wielded by folks like J.K. Rowling to paint all trans-supportive people and trans people as sexist misogynists and actually men, which she can then use to argue that trans women don't experience sexism because she rightly knows that those who experience sexism will often not wish to perpetuate it, at least not overtly or intentionally. This is why the politics of optics that Vaush often focuses on sometimes misses the point of optics politics. Yes, right-wing movements and the people in charge of them don't actually believe or care about misogyny and are just using the language of defending against it in order to actually reinforce it as well as their own power. However, the people that they're speaking to, those who have been radicalized by movements like it, do actually believe in it. Rowling does concern herself with misogyny and misogynists, just only in how it affects her and people like her, not trans people or anyone else.
I do disagree about this for reasons I've already explained. I also have to wonder, do you guys feel, I feel like, because this is kind of like the ground, this is like the foundation of the work, you know, that I do. I actually kind of feel like, in terms of the optics battle, it would be better for people on the left to really lean into making fun of conservatives like J.K. Rowling for being a triggered SJW. You know what I mean? Like J.K. Rowling like freaking out over a joke, like name searching to find a 24-hour-old tweet that doesn't even at her, like making a light misogynistic joke. I really think that if we'd all leaned in and gone like, wow, Lamau, you triggered, you're so fucking sensitive, Jesus Christ. Like, I actually think, because like, it's pretty tough for conservatives to make criticisms of that, isn't it? You know, I took a look at Tim Pool's video saying that J.K. Rowling slammed me, and it's like, okay, you guys are really gonna pretend you care about, you know, women using their trauma as a political argument and being told they're triggered. Like, that's you're gonna pretend to care about that? Like, come on, that's your whole fucking thing. I don't know.
She only sees misogyny as centering around her framing of womanhood and her version of womanhood alone. And those in conservative movements, by the way, also tend to do this same exact thing. Many conservative people may not be in reality actually fighting misogyny because they haven't been experienced or been taught how to conceive of misogyny outside of how cis upper-class white women experience it in their very limited way. They have not experienced or been taught how to conceive of misogyny outside of a cis upper-class white woman's limited experience of it, and not understand the intersectional and often systemic ways that it showcases itself. However, they do believe that they are fighting misogyny because quick sexist tweets are easy for them to square with their limited understanding of what sexism and misogyny is. They see sexism as simply like dudes saying sexist things and devaluing women, like saying babe on Twitter, like how Rowling herself got all upset about this tweet. Rowling's not really worried about intersectional or systemic misogyny because she's never really had to experience it or understand it, or how it affects trans people. But she is concerned about a very narrowed view of what misogyny is. So it's not that people in these movements don't care about misogyny, it's that they don't understand the true scope of what misogyny actually is within our systemically unjust society. So then, to wield that exact type of sexism against J.K. Rowling just reinforces the whole narrative that she works under. That trans women aren't women because they don't face this type of misogyny that she faces, and that trans women are actually just perpetuating that same misogyny that she's pushing.
So I've addressed this point. I disagree with it. I've already said why. You know, but
against. Further, it allows her to reinforce to herself that she is correct because she creates this bubble of virtue around herself, retweeting genderqueer women who thank her for standing up for women everywhere, from the big bad sexist trans women and our allies, because those women too only understand misogyny in the same limited way.
I guess my impression is that there just aren't gender critical women. Like, there are like 5. I don't know. Like, seriously, take a look at all the TERF accounts on Twitter. They're conservatives. You can look through their likes and retweets and stuff. They're not on the left. I don't think they care about misogyny. I just think they're like traditional women who appreciate women in like the, you know, barefoot and pregnant sense. Like, and this whole standing up for women's rights thing is really just like a dog whistle for hating trans women. But they don't actually like care about women's rights, because none of these accounts ever talk about shit like abortion rights or like you know, like misogyny perpetuated by the far right or whatever. If in fact, when they talk about misogyny, you know, it's almost always in the context of like Dems committing misogyny by supporting trans people or whatever. Like, that's the only, I don't know. I feel like if you're a woman and your political advocacy is defined exclusively by your belief that you're a distinct class because of your biology, then there's really not much of a difference between you and all the Nazi Freudlen who would sit at home and have like 8 children and never speak back against their husband because you were producing children for the state. Like, so they could go off to, you know, to the Hitler Jugend when they were like 12 or whatever. Like, I don't know.
She's not actually forced to confront the harm she causes to trans people because she's not even able to empathize or conceptualize it. By feeding this narrative then, it flattens the discourse into binarized and easily comprehensible good versus evil concepts for J.K. Rowling and those movements, rather than the actual human and messy discussion that it is to talk about intersectional and systemic misogyny and racism and transphobia and things like that. It doesn't allow J.K. Rowling or TERFs to actually wrestle with the cognitive dissonance their transphobia would cause if they were forced to see how their attacks actually reinforce misogyny and transphobia at the same time. And so all of this comes back to Vaush's arguments, because he does argue that the goal of him doing tweets like this to use sexism against J.K. Rowling is to trigger and upset her. That it shows someone as big as J.K. Rowling is getting upset at a small-time YouTuber like Vaush, and that is worthwhile and important.
And by the way,
Well, keep in mind, I didn't expect her to respond. I did it because I thought it was fun to do so. But as long as she is going to respond to that, yeah, we should make her look like a triggered SJW.
Rowling never would have screenshotted me if I wasn't misogynistic. So the people who are acting as though me being more in good faith would have led to like people are acting as though I was on a talk show with Rowling where I had the opportunity to say something constructive and I chose not to. If that was the case, I think any criticisms of me would be massively warranted because there's the potential for good faith engagement. But I was just tweeting, you know? She can screenshot and has screenshotted whoever she wants. She has quote tweeted trans people with like 500 followers, and those people then get death threats. They have to close their accounts. She didn't quote tweet me though. She screenshotted me. I wonder why. It's funny that, you know, I can take the hate a lot better than most of the people she harasses can. The point is, she goes looking for the bad look to go after, and as long as she's prowling around, and you know she does this. She drinks wine. She sits on her, no doubt, massive couch that costs more than most people's houses. And she scrolls through Twitter on her phone, and she bemoans how much of a victim she is. And she finds people who are saying mean stuff about her, and she like cry bullies over them, right? I would rather, if she was going to do that anyway, do that about me, because if I hadn't said something misogynistic, she would have just done it to somebody else, and you wouldn't be wringing your hands over it because it wouldn't have been me, you know? I swear to God, for a lot of people on the left, disliking me is some kind of first order thing. The only point that I'm making is that it's okay to criticize the ironic misogyny, but the idea that this is some kind of optical loss, that there was some critical error made, or that I handled the drama incorrectly, as though every tweet that I, a medium-sized YouTuber, send into the void should be treated with the necessary skepticism of you will be quote tweeted and screenshotted by a billionaire. Like, that's ridiculous. Imagine if we did that to every single person posting on the left. Every shit poster, every edgy content creator the Chapo boys have said stuff. Like, imagine, like, would you, if the Chapo boys said some, I have no doubt they've said negative stuff about Rowling. I have no doubt they've said, like, problematic stuff about, you know, a great many conservative people, because I've seen and heard them do it. Sometimes they're even funny when they do it. Imagine, like, that snippet getting posted. Look at these Chapo boys. Wow, I guess, you know, I guess the left really is racist. Or maybe they made some edgy comment about, like, Candace Owens or something. I don't know. Would you all go, damn, Chapo boys really dropped the ball optically? No, you wouldn't. You would celebrate them being a shit poster, and you would make fun of the triggered right. And why aren't more people doing that? J.K. Rowling got triggered by me. She's a crybaby bitch. She's a massive baby. She's a billionaire with huge social power. And she was out there getting angry at some mid-sized YouTuber on Twitter for engaging in, you know, fairly light-handed misogyny. I could be way more misogynistic than that, okay? I had the kid gloves on. I can get, get me a real platform, okay? I'll show you.
So to start off, I do understand his point that if it
What
wasn't
a good
his
time
tweet
to
that got
end.
Rowling upset, it would have been someone else's. So to single out Vaush's tweet as an issue,
seriously,
as if he
Berman.
could have anticipated it being used by Rowling, is probably unfair. However, I don't really think saying, well, other people were doing it too, and doing it worse than me, is ultimately a strong argument in favor of perpetuating the same problem. It doesn't address the issue at hand and just hand waves it away. So, moving on to his stronger points. He's not incorrect in the effects of his tweet. It certainly shows that Rowling is irrationally focused on finding examples in which to stoke her base and narrative. And that is kind of interesting to show how disingenuous she actually is and not willing to engage with what trans people are actually saying, because she doesn't actively seek it out. But we already knew that. We already knew that J.K. Rowling was doing that. So I ultimately wonder what Vaush's tweet is ultimately serving in the long run. Quick little
Well, I just wanted to tweet it. Again, like, I don't like the presupposition that I thought that that tweet of mine would become the center of discourse. I literally just, like, fired off a tweet. Like, must every tweet be, like, have, like, the utilitarian argument? Like, you know, well, why need this exist? Well, I wanted to shitpost. I don't know if I'm perpetuating anything, though. I feel like as long as J.K. Rowling exists, there will be a continuous and virtually unaltered drip feed from her of shit to cry-bully over. I don't think me being one of the cogs in that cycle changes the amount of it. It only changes the context in which it takes place. And the change is a positive one, because to Rowling's followers, I really don't think there's a difference optically between J.K. Rowling cry-bullying over me or over some tiny trans account. But from our perspective, we have the ability to push back and get real attention drawn when it's done to me, because, again, I have a community full of feral edgelord leftists. So, given that, I feel like I feel like the opportunity changes in our favor.
pause and apology here, because for some reason at this point in the video, this mic turned off. So while I was editing, I'm like, oh shoot, the audio quality dips here. So apologies that the audio after this section is a little bit wonky, but I did my best to try to beef it up and make it sound as best as possible. So apologies for the change in audio quality here. It just happens when you talk for a long time on camera that mics decide to be a butt, like this guy. Big butt, butt of a microphone. His ultimate point is to say that making these kind of jokes is ultimately not to care about what Rowling and her followers will think about it.
Wow, that was a
to his mind,
quality
they don't
drop.
care about it, which I already stated that I disagree with and ultimately find it harmfully feeding their narrative, though I do see where he's coming from and where he gets that idea. But that his point is that he's making it for his audience. And so that raises the question, is the harm of making tweets like this and how they're utilized by folks like J.K. Rowling outweighed by the benefit to a more trans-supportive and left-leaning audience? And to my money, I would say not. Because what these types of jokes do and what they're sort of speaking to within an audience that Vaush is cultivating is falling into that type of trigger the libs sort of discourse that the right wing uses. Except in this case, it's the trigger the TERFs. As we see from the same type of joke being used by conservatives, it's often done in order to double down on takes that are there to upset your opponent and then reinforce to your audience that they are actually correct because your takes are upsetting your opponents, which is what you ultimately frame as the right thing to do. That the goal of your tactics should be to upset and only upset your opponents and that you're winning the argument, rather than actually trying to constructively engage with these conversations.
No. That's the mistake. J.K. Rowling doesn't allow for constructive engagement. There have been incredibly nuanced, in-depth criticisms of her that she ignores and will never acknowledge because she's a bigot. Why would she go after the strongest counterarguments? Does Ben Shapiro respond to the incredibly in-depth counterarguments made to him? Like, no. If the only engagement you can get is to trigger them, then yeah, you better fucking trigger them. Yeah. If the only thing that you can do to a political opponent is get them angry and stupid, then that is a thing you should try to maximize. Now, if you can get good faith engagement, like, for example, this is one of the reasons why I go much lighter on Tim Pool than I do
a lot of other conservative commentators, because Tim Pool, for all the dumb fuck shit he says, has me on his platform, which means that I get the chance to engage with him and disagree with him in a way bigger context than I ever could just here. So I try to save my energy for that, you know. Last time it was Charlie Kirk, but there's like an accessibility thing there. And likewise, if I was someone who had the ability to talk to J.K. Rowling on a talk show, I would never try to agitate her on social media, because I know that I'm denigrating my opportunity to engage with her in a much more constructive sense, if that makes any sense, you know? But with J.K. Rowling, I think it's been years now, and I don't think she's ever engaged constructively with any real criticism. So I think it's pretty clear that what we're getting out of her is schizo posting, and what she will get in kind is schizo posting. Oh, hey, Gale.
It's just reinforcing to your own audience their sense of virtue without actually doing anything constructive or adding to the conversation. Further, it also lends a discussion into why your audience is desiring sexist takedowns in the first place, instead of a more nuanced perspective that you're supposed to be providing. And
it's Twitter. I've talked about this for dozens of hours on stream. It's just Twitter. It's just a tweet.
I get it. Vaush is saying that this was just an ironic joke. I get that. But like, if I started saying ironic racist jokes, wouldn't we all take issue with that? Because
I gotta say, it really depends. I have made ironic racist jokes in this stream in a context that I thought was acceptable and continue to think was acceptable. It's probably happened hundreds of times at this point. See, I feel like, okay, chat. Do you guys remember the era of discourse where people who were just bigots would say, oh, dude, my comments are ironic. And then people on the left would say, or like, look at the context is ironic, it's a joke. And then people on the left would say, okay, that context doesn't mean it's not problematic. That's true, but I feel like the left overcorrected to the point where they now legitimately believe that irony can't be a defense. You know? Like, we've gone from irony is always a defense to irony is incapable of being a defense. Which seems to me to be like one of the slogans was like, context doesn't matter, which is like, well, I mean, yeah, it does. It's just the context doesn't always justify the content.
Because we have talked about enough in the past few years how irony is often used to disguise tacit acceptance of these views within our spaces.
Yeah,
when
often.
Conservatives do trigger the libs types jokes, it's ultimately reinforcing their bubbles and stoking them into their worst impulses, because they know that type of over-the-top heightened versions of themselves upsets the other side, which they see as winning the argument because they've just upset the other side.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a win for them. Yeah. When conservatives make left-leaning people angry, that is a win for them. You see what gets them views on YouTube? It's a huge optical win. It's not a win in like you've proven how your positions are better than theirs, but like, who gives a fuck about that? We already know our positions are better than them. Like, I don't argue with conservatives to refine the legitimacy of my own perspectives. Guys, how many times over the course of my streaming career has a conservative I've argued with had a good point? I think maybe zero? I don't think it's actually happened. I don't think I've ever had to change my position. Whenever I change my positions on stream, it's usually because of criticism from the left. Like, I don't argue with people on the right because I'm looking to refine my points against them. I'm doing it to make them angry, to get attention, to siphon followers, to educate my own followers on how to best argue against them. And oftentimes, it's just about stupefying and making them angry. That's just how it is, you know? It's just how engagement is.
But then, that more over-the-top cartoonish version, caked in irony, starts to become more and more acceptable as the actual position, because it instead frames being upsetting over being actually correct in your views.
And by the way, the wonderful YouTuber Jose did a recent video about how this type of conservative comedy ultimately reinforces conservatives' worst impulses, and you should totally check it out, because the dynamic that we're talking about here is the same within conservative circles.
Now, this isn't me trying to say that Vaush is trying to say to his viewers that sexism is okay, or that he's trying to be this more over-the-top cartoonish version, but what I'm saying is that sending tweets like this does cultivate an audience and a discourse where these sort of statements become more and more permissible and allowable over time. If I made a racist joke about Chappelle, it would actually say to my audience that I'm okay with racist jokes at all times, and that sort of rhetoric is more and more acceptable in my...
I guess I would just take this more seriously if people, like, I almost said gender critical. This is most certainly not gender critical. Jesse Gender, sorry. If people like Jesse Gender would, do you think people on the left are making arguments like this every time a trans woman says J.K. Rowling is a bitch?
Because, like, that is misogynistic. Bitch is absolutely a misogynistic slur. It unquestionably is. I don't know how you could get around that. Like, but, like, obviously, like, we don't care. I don't know. I don't know. It's just, you know, Jessie has been nothing but fair in chat. And even though I disagree with a lot of the video, which she did explicitly say would probably be the case, I can't be angry at the comments here, you know.
My space, even if I'm not explicitly condoning racism. Again, this is not me saying that Vaush is responsible for the actions of every single one of his audience or how they view and interpret every single one of his tweets. That would be unfair and ridiculous of me, especially as someone with myself, with an own audience, and understanding how audiences sometimes misinterpret what you're saying and how you have to be very clear and intentional with that. But what he is responsible for is how he models behavior to his audience and builds what is acceptable in his audience's space. And the fact that he is doing these types of tweets speaks to the still inherent misogyny, not necessarily within Vaush, but within leftist spaces in general. Just as there are racist and transphobic elements within leftist spaces as well, as we talked about earlier. Again, it's all nuanced and intersectional. This isn't me calling Vaush a racist, sexist, transphobe, nor does it erase that he is
Vaush bad. Vaush, no.
often outspoken to fight those issues on numerous occasions. But what it does say is that he can also perpetuate those things too. Just as, by the way, I can as well. For example, in some of my early videos on this channel where I was still learning how to make content, I did racist jokes without really understanding that they were offensive and hurtful and ultimately reinforced racism within my space. It wasn't my intention. I wasn't trying to be racist, but making jokes about people's names and not being able to pronounce them does reinforce these sort of racist ideas that center a white experience over other marginalized experiences. Even further, something that I've been trying to dismantle in my content very much lately is the centering of just transgender issues above all others, instead of positioning it as part of the complex system that intersects with many other elements and issues. And so me all saying this isn't an indictment of Vaush, at least on this issue, but more a look at how the issue is much more than Vaush good or Vaush bad, but implicates all of us in it, myself included, and how these issues are inherent within leftist spaces, as well as just, you know, our society in general, because it's built off of sexism, racism, and transphobia, as well as numerous other things, like ableism or anti-fatness.
And to be fair to Vaush, in the clip that I showed earlier, he did make the concession that there were criticisms to be had of his ironic misogyny in his tweet.
The only point that I'm making is that it's okay to criticize the ironic misogyny, but the idea that this is some kind of...
I can't believe after this video, there are people in my chat who are being like, I can't believe you're defending ironic misogyny. I'm gonna fucking KMS, dude. Holy shit. I said it like 18 times in this video. Okay.
Optical loss, that there was some critical error made, or that I handled the drama incorrectly, as though every tweet that I, a medium-sized YouTuber, send into the void should be treated with the necessary skepticism of you will be quote tweeted and screenshotted by a billionaire. Like, that's ridiculous.
But he ultimately seems to consider that a sidestep for his larger concern about the optics surrounding talking about J.K. Rowling in this way, and that he could have done misogyny even worse if he had wanted to, as he states in that video. I think he's ultimately missing the point that if that's his argument, that he's making these tweets for his own audience, that he should be aware of what the ramifications are within his own audience,
well,
as well as, to a lesser degree, as he himself admits, what the audience on the other side would think about the tweet as well. Not to mention how tweets like this will make trans people and women feel within his space.
Ultimately, if you're making tweets like this...
I think, if anything, the response from my community has thoroughly debunked the idea that my behavior encourages, like, sexism within my community, right? I can't lift a finger around these parts without my subreddit explaining to me how I'm, like, genocidal or whatever, you know?
For your audience, I kind of feel that all it does is reinforce sexism implicitly within leftist spaces, which also then leads to acceptance of transphobia as well. This is not saying that Vaush is saying or doing that intentionally, or that he's an awful person, or that I disagree with him on every single issue because he's a debate bro and oh my god, they're the worst. It's not what I'm saying, but that it speaks to a larger problem that we need to begin dismantling within our own spaces, while at the same time trying to make sure we don't reinforce it within the people that we're trying to push back against, which these tweets often do with folks like J.K. Rowling.
Also, I'll briefly mention that in his video, Vaush also argued about what he saw people were arguing against him, basically stating this.
The people who are hand-wringing over this are borderline defending J.K. Rowling by implication. So the people who are fretting over this are essentially siding with the transphobe, either because they're optics or civility politics brained in a very liberal fashion, or because they hate me so much that they have to adopt any position which allows them to condemn me. And it may seem self-centered to say that, but like there's a lot of that on the left.
Now, that's a larger conversation that I could get into with this video, but I'm not going to really touch upon it because I actually don't think my criticism in this video are actually stemming from those places that he's stating there.
That's
I think
true.
I've made very clear that I do not agree with J.K. Rowling in any way, shape, or form, and I'm not really worried about the optics of that appearance, but more just how...
Well, yeah, it's not about agreeing with J.K. Rowling, right? Yeah, it's the idea that you're... Well, Jessie is talking about the optics because she's saying that you're giving ammunition to...
how it's actually reinforcing these issues within J.K. Rowling herself and her audience. That I'm not worried about optics necessarily in a way that he's talking about in terms of like a liberal mindset of like we need to be nice to the transphobes, but more just that this sort of dynamic is ultimately reinforcing these issues to these people and not actually helping a audience on our side as well. It's not really making an argument for either audience in any way that's constructive or helpful. And secondly, I hope I've made very, very clear that this video is not just made to take down Vaush just because I dislike Vaush for some reason. I don't dislike Vaush completely and totally, and this video is not just to dislike and hate on Vaush just because it's Vaush. However, I will say I do take umbrage with the fact that he paints pretty much all opposition to his stance in these lights, when I hope is made clear, and other people have made clear on Twitter and in other spaces, that there is honest critique of Vaush's tactics and words.
But even further, what I especially dislike about
Well, I guess, while I don't have an issue with this video, my criticism still holds to Jesse. And I would ask, if Ben Shapiro did, like, a video saying that, like, this proves why black culture is bad, when looking at, like, a SoundCloud rapper where he used some misogynistic lyrics, like, would you, as a person on the left, feel comfortable going, you know, oh, I feel like this black person really missed with these misogynistic lyrics? You know, like, I don't think it's more acceptable to be misogynistic if you're black than if you're white, right? I think there are so many instances where we recognize, like, okay, well, now's not the time to have that convo because there's, like, a bigger issue at hand and we cede ground to them by focusing on the wrong point. But, like, we're not doing it here for some reason. You know what I mean?
this whole conversation is having to do this video in this first place. How I'm frustrated that this conversation about trans people is currently being centered around a cis woman and a cis man. It's deeply frustrating that the conversation around and about trans people rarely includes trans people within it. This is not Vaush's fault, because it's...
Oh, hold on. This should be very affirming, okay? Being talked over and ignored in discussions of your own rights is a quintessentially female experience, right? Trans women should feel incredibly validated by this development.
Often what typically happens when trans issues are discussed at all. Trans people rarely get listened to in conversations that directly affect us. So my goal here is to offer this video in good faith criticism and use this specific instance as a way to talk about how these issues appear everywhere, not just with Vaush. And I offer it up so that all of you can disagree with me or agree with me. I don't sit here thinking that I have the moral dictation on everything here, but more just wanting to create that conversation. I will admit that there is a fear with me having made this video and centering it around Vaush as an example of it, that it might just devolve into our audiences attacking each other, like Vaush's fans attacking me or my audience going after Vaush.
Okay, I think I know where the rest of this video is going to go. This is a very expedient script, but yes, okay. I like the video. I disagree with it, but it was well laid out. It wasn't just good faith, because I don't care about good faith anymore. It's cool. All right. Maybe we can talk to Jesse sometime. I guess I'd be curious. I guess I just want an answer to, like, the black SoundCloud rapper, or, like, a person being, like... Because there is kind of, like, an arbitrary acceptance for some kinds of bigotry, right? Like, it's, like, can we all agree, for example, like, making fun of Ben Shapiro for being short isn't, like... great, but whatever. Like, really, whatever. Making fun of Ben Shapiro for being Jewish is not great. It's distinctly the opposite of great, actually, you know? It's very not great. It's quite bad. Very bad. But, like, both of those are forms of bigotry. I feel like we have kind of arbitrary lines on what type of punching up and punching down is acceptable, and but I think you can justify those, right? A lot of it, it's like decorum, okay? Why do your parents ask you not to put your elbows on the table while you're eating? Well, they probably don't know, but there's a reason why, okay? It's the same reason we have a lot of standards for decorum. Because of dumb reasons. They are dumb. They're arbitrary. But there is a reason. It's about self-control. And breaking arbitrary, meaningless social boundaries can be a warning sign that you're going to break other meaningful social boundaries as well. Does that make any sense? So, like, let me give you an example, okay? If you give a person a curt hug while greeting them, which is pretty common, you know, in a purely, like, logical, let's take away all decorum sense, you know, there's not really a difference between giving a person a quick hug by putting your arm around, like, behind their neck, or, like, you know, like right here, the upper shoulders, and putting it down in their lower waist. There's not fundamentally a difference between these things. Neither of them are sex organs or anything, but
obviously, in the real world, there's a huge difference between those two types of like greeting. You know what I mean? A massive difference. Now, in a purely logical, let's all be logical brain sense, right? There shouldn't be a difference between these two, but there's a good reason why we have that social standard. Because people who will violate one form of decorum by, say, saying hello to a woman and grabbing her down by her lower waist, as opposed to like a quick hug right around the upper back, being willing to break that sense of decorum might mean they're going to do something else that does really matter. It indicates a respect for boundaries. Exactly. If they break that rule, then how do you know they're not willing to break another? A lot of decorum serves that function. And I think, in a respect, that's what we're talking about when we talk about ironic misogyny or making fun of Ben Shapiro's height. It's not good, but based on arbitrary social standards, they're within the realm of acceptable unacceptability. Whereas making fun of a person's race or their religion might not be. The reasons for that might be arbitrary, but we have these arbitrary divisions because an unwillingness to adhere to them can be indicative of other people's behaviors and priorities. So, inherently, is there a difference in the example I provided earlier of a coworker going, well, that's how women are, versus, well, that's how Mexicans are? In a fundamental sense, the answer is no, there isn't. But in a practical sense, where we take into account social context, a willingness to say the latter, that's how Mexicans are, indicates a willingness to violate boundaries, which might indicate that person is committed enough either to, well, let's say, social unpermissibility or just explicit racism, that they're willing to break those boundaries. You know, they're not capable of keeping it in, so to speak. Does that make sense? That's one of the reasons why, as I've grown older, I've come to respect manners and decorum. They're arbitrary and they're stupid, but you do learn a lot about a person who's willing to break those rules, don't you? Sometimes when they break those rules, it's not like a warning sign, you know, like sometimes people are just kind of, I don't know, slobbish or familiar, and that's not necessarily like a terrible thing. But sometimes, well, you know, you can use that as a metric for, well, maybe sometimes there's something kind of wrong with them. If anything, I feel like the most explicit example of this is that women have, in many cases, a very finely tuned sense of when other people's behavior with them is acceptable or not, because it can be potentially dangerous for them to not pick up on those warning signs. You know what I mean? Like, is this guy acting too much? Or is he just like, you know, really friendly? Because that's a thing, right? Like, sometimes they're just really friendly, and like maybe that can be a bit off-putting, but it's not dangerous. Sometimes it's more than that. Yeah, like knowing when to cuss, it can indicate a lack of decorum or them trying to make you comfortable with casual language, and you need to know when to do it. Yeah, exactly. Like being able to cut, right? Like, clearly, I don't care about people saying fuck or whatever, right? But I do learn something about a person who's willing to shout swear words too loud in a public place, you know? Sometimes it's just them being kind of rowdy, and I can respect that, but sometimes it indicates a disregard for other people's arbitrary social limitations, you know? Like, even if you're like around kids or whatever, saying like shit out loud, I think I respect people who won't say swear words around children. Not because I think it's bad for children to hear swear words. I don't. But I think it's good for people to be respectful of the possibility that other people's parents might not want their kids hearing swear words. It indicates, you know, a conscientiousness, an acceptability of other people's standards, a willingness to respect boundaries. Whereas just shouting over that and imposing your own standards, even if their standards are arbitrary and stupid, can mean that you might be disrespectful in other ways. Does that make sense? I feel like that's the best primer on like social etiquette that I'm ever going to give on this stream. Yeah, fundamentally it's about respecting others. Thanks, I'm not autistic now.